the Teach Pitch podcast. We are very excited to be launching a series of interviews for Teach Pitch, a global community of tens of thousands of subscribers from over 205 countries who all have a desire to improve the state of education in this world. And for these interviews, we have selected a number of our subscribers who have achieved great things. And by great, I mean amazing. Think of former presidents, entrepreneurs, fashion designers, hospital builders, non-profit founders, authors, journalists, doctors, etc. And what all our guests have in common is that despite their great success, they've encountered many enormous challenges. So what were these challenges and how did they overcome them? That is what we are going to be talking about here. My name is Aldo de Pap and I'm massively looking forward and very grateful you can join us in this journey. So sit back, relax and download the podcast here.
One of the most disappointing truths that I have absorbed in the last decade is that the only organism whose behavior you can actually control is your own. And so the more effective you are at managing your behavior, your emotions, and your thoughts, that's what ultimately determines how effective you're going to be as a teacher. And it's the complete opposite of what I would have thought 10 or 15 years ago when I'm going into dog training because I like animals.
Happy Friday, everyone. It's the 25th of February, 2022, and we had quite a week. Loads of things happening, loads of things in motion. Not all of them good. I mean, some of them even disasters, I would say, with the war in Ukraine and how things are developing there, which is a little bit worrisome. Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough of the situation and I don't know enough of what's happening, but my heart goes out to the people of the Ukraine, because if people are bombing targets around you and if innocent civilians are being hurt and are being killed, then that's always something horrific and awful, and that should be stopped immediately. And I'm very sad that all of this is happening. So my heart goes out to the people in Ukraine. And I hope that a ceasefire will be in effect as soon as possible, so that no one will get hurt, so that nothing bad will happen. And I hope that geopolitics and all this hunger for power aside, that this will very quickly cease. Yeah, so I mean, it's difficult to bridge that from what's happening in Russia to our next guest. I'm going to do an attempt, though, because I'm very excited about our next guest. Our next guest is a dog trainer. And you might or might not know this, but I grew up with dogs. All my life, I've been surrounded by dogs because my dad was a veterinary, as was my grandfather. So basically, my family and dogs, we are one. So we love dogs, and we also see the necessity to train dogs. And then talking to someone like Hannah Branigan, that's our next guest, and hearing her about how dogs should be trained, what dogs might think and feel, but also very important, even most important, what the owner thinks and feels. That's really very inspiring. And for anyone who's interested in getting a dog, or if you have a dog, then I would very much recommend that you check out Hannah Branigan's website, which is hannahbranigan.dog, as well as her podcast. She's got a great podcast, which is called Drinking from the Toilet, which I love as a title. So check out hannahbranigan.dog and everything she has to offer and how she approaches how we should deal with dogs. This interview was very inspiring for me because Hannah is really very self-conscious and is choosing her words very carefully. And it was really nice to see that she, in whatever she does, she obviously put a lot of thought in it. And she also bridges dog training to normal teaching and to normal ways of communicating in the teaching and learning process, which I think is a very elegant and very noble thing to do. So even if you are not interested in dogs, it's still good and nice and interesting to listen to Hannah and hear her ideas about training others and communicating with others. Yeah, and by means of an update, the Inverness Half Marathon, very excited how that is all evolving. I've run a 10K and another 12K, and then did a couple of 3Ks, 4Ks, 5Ks. So I'm getting it together when it comes to the training. The weather is, there have been storms. We had Storm Eunice, and after that, Storm Franklin. So the weather hasn't been on my side. Nevertheless, I am persevering and continue running, and I'm really enjoying it. And I can, again, I don't want to be patronizing, don't want to lecture anyone, but sports is just good for you. So get out there, go do something, get physical. Don't only be in your head. Make sure you also get some exercise in, just because it is the right thing to do. I'm signing off here, and I hope that you will enjoy this interview. Hannah Branigan, the dog trainer.
This podcast is brought to you by Mindstone, a platform that lets you build courses curated from the best online content, helping your students learn faster and remember more. Check out mindstone.com and find out how you can get started. We're so happy to be partnering with Hee Ha Ho, an interactive video platform that enables teachers and students to easily create amazing clickable videos for learning. Check out heehaho.com. That's HIHAHO.com for more information and your free starter account. A big thank you to our friends at Caesars Maths Challenger, the only puzzle that effectively boosts your numeracy, critical thinking, and brain power. Go to CaesarsPuzzles.com, that is spelled CZEUS puzzles.com, to get your brain buzzing. We are so excited to be working with the team Learning Ladders, the only platform that provides assessment that goes way beyond tracking to effectively support teaching and learning for EYFS, primary, and secondary settings. Go to learningladders.info to find out more.
So a very warm welcome to a new episode of the Teach Pitch podcast. And today I'm very excited to have someone here with me virtually. She's based in North Carolina, but she has a very interesting profession. My guest is Hannah Branigan, and she's a dog trainer. And now I'm a big lover of dogs, and I'm sure many people in this world are. And you might not notice, but my father was a veterinary, as well as my grandfather was a veterinary. So I was raised with a lot of dogs and loads of animals. I did not choose this profession, nor did my brother. My 2-year-old daughter, she's leaning now towards making that choice for the veterinary profession, or perhaps maybe become a dog trainer. And if she does, then I'm sure I'd recommend her to talk to Hannah Branigan. Hannah, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yes. Well, when I heard about your work, I was really very inspired, because you've got a great website, which is hannahbranigan.dog, and it really brings it all together. I really like how it's all set up, how you inform your clients about a profession that, to my idea, is very much something that you need to be with the dog to kind of do it. You need to be with the owner of the dog and, make sure that the dog understands you. But then there's also, in today's day and age, there are lots of possibilities of doing it differently. And I think you have multiple formats whereby you train dogs and their owners also in a different way. And I hope we can talk a little bit about that. And what I also think is interesting, and then I will have you talk about it in great detail, is where you are an advocate for change in the field of dog training. Mm-hmm. Because lots has been tried and tested, I think, in training dogs. A lot is very physical, and you're basically not necessarily in favor of any physical punishment or kind of any physical behavior, but more looking at other ways of educating your dog. So but let's start there. Could you talk a little bit about where we should start when we want to train our dog?
Yeah, well, I think that, like a lot of educational, adjacent fields, animal training has historically been very punishment focused. A lot like things we do with children and similar. And it's been hard to change people's minds. There's a huge, just a lot of momentum behind this is how things have always been done. And so trying to come in, as a new professional, as a woman, and again, historically male-dominated industry, to try and bring a different lens, a different way to look at behavior. There's similar movements, similar changes happening in a lot of fields, trying to move away from punishment and more towards positive reinforcement, less aversive, less coercive methods and techniques, and looking at more at what is the function of behavior. So the first thing, like kind of the simplest thing that we always talk about when approaching training a dog or trying to solve a behavior problem with a dog is, rather than focusing on what's the behavior that you don't like that you want to stop, what can we teach your dog to do? What behavior do you want them to do in that place? And then can we figure out a way, is there a skill missing? Do we need to teach a behavior from scratch, or is that behavior already occurring and we just need to see more of it? Do we need to see it in a particular context? Let's say, for example, that you don't like it when your dog barks when the doorbell rings. So really common behavior that it's very normal dog behavior. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your dog. When the doorbell rings, that's a cue that's been associated with something exciting happening. And so a lot of dogs will run to the front door, barking. Some people don't mind. It's not a big deal. Some people, it really irritates them, especially if you live in an apartment or you have a new baby and every time the dog barks, the baby wakes up. And that's really upsetting if you're a new mom. So if the behavior we don't like is the barking, well, what would you like your dog to do instead? And so looking for what's an alternate behavior, substitute behavior we could put in that place. One of the go-tos that we use a lot in this situation is, could we teach the dog to go sit on his bed, or we call it go to station. So go sit on a dog bed or a mat that's nearby. And so then we replace the behavior of running towards the front door and the barking that's associated with that with moving away from the front door and going to a station, which we can then reinforce. So it works a lot better than trying to attack the barking directly, and we don't actually need to stop the barking. We just need to put something else there.
Yeah. So offer choices to the dog, or offer alternatives to the dog, and not being over focused on, as you say, what needs to stop, because it's almost like there needs to be a replacement for what they need to stop, right? It's kind of, what else are they going to do? I don't like it when, so my mom has a dog, which is a very lovely dog, but whenever there's a cyclist passing, he just wants to chase the cyclist. And he doesn't do anything, but he's quite big in, as a dog. He's the sweetest dog you'll ever see, but the cyclist, he scares them to death because they're kind of on a bike and you have this dog chasing you. And of course, it's very embarrassing. You end up apologizing 17 times to the cyclist. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't mean it, whatever. So, of course, we try to keep him on a leash and whatever, but sometimes it just, something happens and it doesn't go as planned. So do you have any tips on that level? What we should do?
Absolutely. I mean, chasing moving objects is, again, it's a very normal dog behavior. Dogs are biologically predators, so that's part of their natural history. That's part of the genetic package that comes when we bring these predators into our house, which is typically something we don't love being reminded of when dogs are chasing cars or bicycles or small children or cats. But it is what it is. It's part of dogdom. And it is really frustrating when you're trying to enjoy your dog. You have a pet dog that you brought into your home, and you probably had a vision, a picture, a purpose for bringing this dog in, and it probably did not involve hunting for most people. Yeah. Certainly there are still working dogs out in the world, but I'm going to guess that's not true for your family. And you probably had a vision that's like, we can go for relaxing walks, and I'll have this companion, and it's this quiet time that we're enjoying together. And instead, you end up having this really embarrassing social interaction, and that can be really punishing for the owner, the handler of the dog, because now you've had this embarrassing experience. And so you're less likely to take your dog for a walk, which means your dog's world starts to get smaller and starts to have less enrichment. You're getting less out of your relationship with your dog, so you're not enjoying the relationship as much. So this is definitely something that we would like to address, and it could be, usually it's going to be a combination of management. If you were one of my clients, I would say, well, are there places that times or places that we could walk your dog that would meet your needs and are less likely to have skateboarders or bicycles or whatever the trigger is. And sometimes it's that easy, like, oh yeah, there's a trail behind my house and we could just go through the woods instead of out by the road.
Yeah.
That's less common. But we can teach your dog to do an alternate behavior. So one of my own dogs, it chases cars and also bicycles and anything with wheels, pretty much. He's very, very, very interested in moving objects. I live on a busy road. There's only one way out. And there isn't really a way to take him out of my house unless I put him in my car and drive him to a park somewhere. So we're going to be exposed to cars. And so I have kind of a two-pronged approach. One, in other areas, like other times, other contexts where it is appropriate, I give him a chance to do chasing-like behaviors towards usually like a toy. So playing with a frisbee, playing with a ball. So he gets a chance to kind of meet that canine need in a way that's acceptable for me and actually again enriches our relationship rather than detracting from it. And then when I do take him out, because part of why I like to have dogs is I like to go, I run and I like to take my dogs running with me. And sometimes I take my daughter and we'll go for a walk together. And so when I'm doing that, I put in an alternate behavior. So the previous behavior would be cued, here comes a car, and because dog's hearing is usually a lot better than ours, he could hear the car approaching way before I was aware that it was there. And I would see him kind of go into that lock-in mode of, ooh, there's a car coming. And then that would escalate, and as the car would approach, he would hit the end of the leash, sometimes spin, sometimes squeal and make irritating noises, which again makes it hard to enjoy the walk. And if I'm running, it's not entirely safe either. So instead, now when he sees a car, I replaced it with a behavior of stepping to the side, so stepping off the shoulder of the road, and he turns away and does a behavior we call a hand target. So he jumps up and pushes his nose into my hand, which lifts his head up away from the car, so he's not staring at the car. It's the opposite behavior of moving towards the car, and then as soon as the car goes by, I continue moving forward again, and that maintains the behavior of this new thing of stepping away, targeting my hand, and then continuing the run, which is a nice functional reinforcer. So like one of the places that we went to was the library closest to my house, which has the entrance to the parking lot, and then it has sort of a U-shaped parking lot, and so the cars would come in. It was adjacent to a school, so there's a soccer field off to one side, so I could be 100 yards away, 100 meters away from the cars. And at that point, he's glancing at the cars, he notices the cars, but he's not reacting in a way, not exhibiting any of the behaviors that I'm considering problematic. And when he could do his little hand targeting behavior, then I could move 50 meters away. And again, he could notice it, he could do the behavior. Now I can go 25 meters away, and now I can 10 meters away, until we could be right there on the sidewalk. And with a slow moving car, he glances at it and he looks to me for the opportunity to do his little trick. And I can reinforce that. And then I went to a different parking lot where we could see cars moving at more of a traffic, like normal city traffic speeds, and repeated the same kind of process. And then I brought it back home where the cars are faster. I don't have as much control, but because he'd already had that kind of stepped learning history, it was a lot easier to get that to happen here. And now, he's 3 years old and we are just in maintenance mode.
That's great. And so what's the learning trajectory here for the dog? So from you starting with the toy and the food to now it being in maintenance mode, as you say, how long does that take? How long did it take in this case? I mean, I know it's difficult to give an average because it's different for every dog, but in this
it's different for every dog, and it depends a lot on how consistently you apply it. So it's probably more about consistency. If I didn't have other things in my life and this was my primary job, I could probably have gotten through it in a matter of weeks. That's not the case, unfortunately. So this is me squeezing in. I would say I see progress almost immediately if I have the right plan, I've broken it down in the right ways, and I'm incrementing the difficulty, the challenge level appropriately. I should be able to see pretty continuous improvement. To go from working at the library parking lot to like a usable behavior on my street, I would say was probably 3 to 4 months of very intermittent work. And probably the first month of that was just, kind of testing different theories. Like, is this how I need to approach it? Oh no, that was a terrible idea. Well, let's try something different. Let's take a little different angle, and then finally landing on, all right, this is it. This is where we need to be, and then applying it from there.
Yeah. Interesting. And by the by, you have multiple dogs, right? So this is just one of how many dogs do you have yourself?
4 in the house right now. Yeah.
4. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So, meanwhile, you need to take care of the other 3 as well, right? So it's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. A couple of questions come to mind, and I'm also, I hope you don't mind, but tapping into kind of my own personal experience of listening also to stories of my father. One is basically whereby the owner has certain desires towards the behavior of the dog that are a little bit out of scope. So my father, he's now retired, but he, many times he said that, there were certain things I just refused to do because people came to him and they asked, as you say, like, I have an apartment and, it's very annoying that the dog has a tail because, that's not good for the furniture or something like that. Can something be done similar with the nails or similar with the barking? Like, people think at a certain point to have a gadget, not a living being. And then they ask for specific things that you're like, no, that's not what you're supposed to do because it's a dog. It's not a toy. Did you ever come across any of those wishes when it came to people who basically have out of bounds desires when it comes to changing their dog's behavior that you say, well, no, I cannot change it into a toy. It will remain a dog? Or does that not ring a bell?
No, I mean, that happens all of the time. One of the biggest things I think that is sometimes disappointing to discover when you get into animal training is that for any animal trainer, your primary species of focus is Homo sapiens. So the vast majority of the work that you're doing is with the people, right? So, and it is incredibly common for the owner, the human in the equation, to have. I mean, I think we all have expectations. Like we walk through life with expectations of how things are going to look and how things are supposed to look, and we're frequently encountering that gap between what we expect and what's actual reality. And that's kind of a painful gap. And I hit it all the time. And it is also, I think, part of being human to wish that there was a quick fix that doesn't involve a lot of cognitive or physical effort and will just relieve your pain immediately. I mean, that's why the diet industry is so popular, because if there could be this one, eat this one food, reduce belly fat, like that would be great, instead of the actual answer, which is going to be long-term healthy lifestyle choices. Nobody wants to hear that.
Too much work.
It's so much work. Like, can't you just give me a pill? Is there like, an acupuncture I could do or something? So, the same thing with our dogs, and just like with our kids, part of my job is trying to have conversations, almost sometimes from like a motivational interviewing kind of perspective, of trying to understand what expectations the human has, and what need are they actually trying to get met. So they may come to me with something like, or I have absolutely heard I want my dog's tail removed because he's knocking things, or like I've heard that one, surgically altering dogs' vocal cords so that they don't bark as loudly. Those are really common. And where I usually try to go from there is trying to understand what's really happening for you. Like, what's your pain for you as a person? What need isn't being met? Or, could we define success in another way?
Yeah.
Is there a way that we could, make maybe a simple change to the environment? Sometimes, what if we put your coffee table up on wooden blocks so it was just 4 inches higher, and now your dog's tail doesn't sweep the wine glass off every evening? So dogs barking at windows is a really common complaint. Again, dogs bark. That is part of being a dog, and nobody wants to hear, well, you shouldn't have gotten a dog if you didn't like barking, because that's, well, one, it's really invalidating, and 2, I have the dog now and I love the dog, and I don't like being, possibly even shamed that I'm having this problem with my dog. I just want it fixed. And that's one that I've heard even more in the last 2 years, since everybody's working from home and everyone's trying to be professional on Zoom, but their dog, who's used to being home alone, is standing on the back of the sofa barking at everybody walking by on the sidewalk. Yeah. Well, one solution might be to stop the barking, either by, again, surgically altering the dog's vocal cords. That's expensive, it's invasive. It doesn't actually solve the problem because they can still make a lot of noise.
Yeah, they'll still make.
Yeah, and there's some ethical concerns there, which are very real. We could try to use something like an electric shock collar and punish the dog every time that he barks. There's the most common strategy that owners try, which is to like mute themselves and yell "knock it off" at the dog. That usually doesn't work at all. It's not really a training strategy. It's just a human emotional response. We can also make some small changes to the environment, which can be incredibly effective, like they make a vinyl like privacy film that you can put on your lower windows so that your dog can't see the sidewalk from that position. And so now he can't see it. The visual cue that was inducing the barking is now unavailable, and the barking tends to be much reduced, maybe even eliminated. So that's really usually inexpensive, and there's no training involved, and that's pretty close to a quick fix. And we can combine that with a training opportunity like, when I see my dog going up to the window or I see him noticing someone on the street, I can tell him to go get on his bed. You can see I have a dog behind me on a bed. That's something that they're trained to do when I'm doing a podcast interview or a Zoom call. Yeah.
Nice. No, thank you for explaining that. One question that comes to mind is like, do you ever kind of draw a line? Because I mean, I get what you're saying about, barking if someone passes, that you would like to change that. And that has nothing to do with you not loving your dog or you not being caring. Mm-hmm. I do think that there's a difference from that to, wanting a tail surgically removed or the vocal cords. I do think, even though some people might deal with it out of ignorance, I do think you can say, well, I don't think that's a good way forward, because it's a dog at the end of the day. I might be more strict there, but that would be my opinion, that it's not something you should. Is there any place where you draw the line? That's basically my question. Have you ever had a request? It's like, no, and this is wrong. Actually, this is. You cannot ask this from me because, again, you don't have wishes.
Right. No, I really see my client is the team. It's the human animal bond. That's it's sort of like a family therapist or a couples counselor. My client is the dyad, or the whole family, in that case. So the first thing I try to understand is what's really bothering you. And so if the problem is I feel embarrassed when I'm on a Zoom meeting and my dog is barking. It's hard for me to focus, and I feel like it's unprofessional, and I feel like my friends are judging me. So like, okay, well, how can we meet that need so that your dog isn't barking during Zoom meetings, or you don't feel embarrassed, and at the same time respect the dogness of the dog, right? So I get very passionate. I believe very strongly in the beautiful plasticity of behavior. There's so much that we can impact with clever arrangement of environment and teaching skills and breaking things down, and constructing new behaviors, and through reinforcement. There's so much that we can do, and we're restricted within the range of what is biologically appropriate for this individual. And there are people who have, who would love their dogs to do something that's just not realistic. And again, the majority of the time, I'm able to get down to what do you really need to happen? And would it feel like a success to you if it looked like this at the end of the day? And provide, a couple of options. A lot of times that works. Some of the time it doesn't. Some of the time the animal, they're just not a good fit together. So here's a wish that a lot of folks have. And again, this can go both ways. So I don't know actually how this plays out in other countries, but in the US, there is a cultural phenomenon of the dog park. And it's a dedicated space in usually part of some other park. It's fenced in, and you bring your dog to that park and you let them play off leash with other dogs. And so on any given day, there could be 1 to 100 dogs. You may know some of them may be unfamiliar. You may not know them. And a lot of people love the social element of that. The reason they want to go to the dog park is because they want to stand in the corner with their coffee and chat with the other dog owners while their dogs play. Yeah. Very similar to how a lot of parents really want to take their kids to the playground so that they can sit on the bench with their coffee and talk to the other parents while their kids play. Yeah. And that's a big part of their picture of what they think dogs should be. There's a whole lot of dogs that don't love that, or are not appropriate for it. There are, just like people, there are dogs that we might label as like extroverts. These are the golden retrievers and Labrador. This is stereotyping because not all Goldens and Labs are like this, but the Labrador retrievers of the world, the golden retrievers of the world are typically very socially open. They stay very social into adulthood. And they could be door-to-door salesmen. They could work in retail and be very happy about that. Yeah. And then there are other breeds, again, to stereotype, a lot of our herding breeds, a lot of our working breeds, they're more introverted. They're more of what I call like a book club dog. They may have like a couple of close friends that they like to hang out with low key, have a glass of wine together, talk about current events, but they're absolutely miserable at a nightclub. They hate cocktail parties where you're trying to interact with unfamiliar people. And of those dogs, some of them will just do what I do at when I'm trapped at a cocktail party and stand by the bar and kind of disassociate until it's polite enough to leave. But others will get defensive, right? So if the golden comes up and is getting in their face and not respecting their personal space, and we'll see dog fights and we will see bites. Yeah. And the first conversation I have is, again, what's the need you're trying to meet going to the dog park? Some people believe that it's what their dog needs. And they don't actually care about the dog park, but they think going to the dog park is something that their dog needs to have a good life. And then I could say, actually, there's a lot of ways to have an enriched life without going to nightclubs. You can have all of these, potential outlets. Not all dogs need that. And if your dog's not enjoying it, then it's not in the dog's best interest to try to pour a ton of resources into training your dog to tolerate the dog park when we can meet his needs and yours in another way. Yeah. And there are other people who no, this is he has to learn how to do this. And that's something also that's not something, I don't think it's appropriate.
So they're saying I want my dog to be more social. I want my dog to become socially engaged, and I want my dog to do well at parties and at cocktail parties. That's what their what their wish is. Whereas that's never going to happen because your dog's
not going to happen with this dog. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny that's that they think. And what do you think drives them that they say other than wanting to drink coffee with the other owners, but why do you think they are so adamant on that their dog should do that? Is it like you want your child also to socialize? Is that a little bit, does it come from that you think? I
mean, I am not a human psychologist. Okay, I do often find that I do often find that the roadblocks that I run into are often not dog training roadblocks. There's something that's going on with the human that's really outside the scope of my job. And it's not my place to say, well, I can't help you as a dog trainer, but have you tried therapy? But I do think there's, just like with kids, I think we do get a lot of projection. We get that expectations, and my friend Emily says you can't let your expectations interfere with your observations, but you get, effectively like a confirmation bias stuff, all of those kind of cognitive distortions come into play where you're so locked down on the idea of this is what my dog should be like, which of course should be a red flag just from a language perspective. And then when they're not, that's not acceptable. And they can't wrap their head around that their dog may be having a different experience.
Yeah. Thank you. I had one question around trauma, because I think we've already established there's a little bit of a crossover between owner and dog, and that it's almost your role to kind of see what's going on here. How is the relationship defined? I was just wondering, because sometimes you have things that sadly, so we've adopted a dog who was traumatized because it was abused and came from an asylum in Spain, and already as a puppy, so quite young, we adopted him, or my mother adopted him, and then the dog was flown in with his brother from Spain to the Netherlands. So we were told from the beginning that even though he was very young, he might be traumatized by what he has seen on a very young age. Mm-hmm. So this is not something like that belongs to dogdom, I would say. Mm-hmm. This is just something very unfortunate that a dog came across, mm-hmm. which in this case was abuse. We suspect that the previous owner was just not into dogs and had a stick and slapped the dog around, and maybe even worse than that. Have you ever came across kind of those severe situations, not directly with its direct owner, but maybe dogs that went through that? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Oof, that's a big one. Let me see if I can organize some thoughts around that. The short answer is yes. It's not uncommon because hurt people, right? And hurt people hurt dogs too. So we see the same kind of trajectory or transmission. If you yourself experienced stuff in childhood, poor emotional regulation, get frustrated really easily, and then that gets taken out on the people around you, and that often includes the animals around you too. So we definitely see that. It's less common than variations on neglect. A dog that hasn't necessarily had an overtly abusive experience, but just hasn't had a lot of experience. They've been in a backyard or a kennel for sensitive periods of their life. And so everything is new and scary. And so they develop a lot of fear behaviors. And of course, genetics is part of it too, right? I have worked with dogs that came from, really serious conditions in a dog fighting ring, and they come out wagging their tails and they're happy to see you, and you would never believe what they've been through. And then we've had dogs that had every advantage growing up and are still easily afraid, react very defensively, and then everything in between. And some of the time, dogs have bad experiences, or just out of ignorance, or even out of a misguided attempt to train. It was just probably actually the most common where we'll see that. But it doesn't matter from the dog's perspective, because this is what they have today. They have these these different triggers, trigger problematic behavior, and it can interfere with their quality of life. And that's something that we really have a lot of, we're very concerned about. And I think it's a relatively new idea that dogs can be afraid, that dogs can have emotions very similar to ones that humans have. I mean, is it the same experience? Probably not. Dogs lack language, so they probably don't have all the things that we would throw into like the emotional intelligence bucket in terms of granularity, but they experience the same contingencies that we do. And so if you've had a very aversive experience and associate it with specific triggers or cues, stimuli in your environment, and you develop behaviors to escape or avoid that aversive, I mean, that's what we call fear, right? So why they have all the same brain structures that we do. So why would they not experience the same kinds of things that we do when we feel afraid? It used to be that a dog that's lunging and barking at people, again, we would label them as aggressive. We might even bring in, words like dominant, and the idea, and we develop a lot of stories around why they're doing this. And again, the focus would be very much on stopping the behavior. And the more we learn about behavior and applying what we know about behavior in all species, also applies to dogs, most of those dogs are afraid, right? It's like they're reacting defensively out of fear, just like a defensive human might be using words in the same way. And if we approach it from that angle, well, now we can say, okay, so we have these specific triggers, something in this dog's history. They've learned that these things signal an unsafe situation, and they're exhibiting these behaviors to try to escape and get safe again. And how could we maybe give them other tools so that they can feel safe? Can we use just the gold standard desensitization and counter conditioning to change that response?
And what about trauma with the owner? Because as you said, like there's a lot of projection going on, whereby there, this is also, again, going to the stories of my father. He sometimes said that an owner came with the dog to him and said, well, things haven't been the same since the divorce. And the dog misses my ex, and then gives an entire scala of reasons that my dad says, like, well, is that the dog feeling this, or is it you? Or which is understandable. And my father never said, well, it's not the dog's problem, but he did end up being more of a psychologist for the owner rather than treating the dog. So there's there can be trauma with the owner as well that is projected upon the dog. I don't know if you've ever seen that, or if you've ever experienced that. Oh
yes, absolutely. I mean, we love to make meaning, right, as humans, so we're always looking for a narrative to validate our experience, and we absolutely include dogs in those as well. I mean, some of the time it's very benign, and I just let it go because it's outside of my scope as a professional. Sometimes sometimes we're seeing choices that are not helpful for the dog. And again, I mean, that's a tough situation for me because it's not my job, and I have a hard enough time with boundaries as it is, and that's one of those where I have to learn to actually stay in my lane.
Stop.
They definitely see. I mean, and some of them there may be some validity to. I hear a lot about after another pet has died or a family member has died, we'll see changes in behavior in the dog, and sometimes there are changes in behavior of the dog. Could we say for sure the dog is mourning, or is it just that the routine is different now? And I don't know.
Yeah.
Jury's out for me on that. I think probably both things can be true. Sometimes it's one or the other, and other times, this is a human issue. I think the dog's probably okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's you always need to wonder, right? But I think the good thing and the fun thing about your job is you help both, right? You help both the owner as well as the dog. So good on you, and it's good to find your way in the middle. Hannah, what got you into this?
I mean, on the one hand, it's really a very common story. What really pushed me into it is, I think, similar to how a lot of folks end up in animal behavior and training. I had a dog that had really challenging behaviors, and he was aggressive towards other dogs and aggressive towards people, and he even bit me. And in the process of trying to find help for him, I went way far down the rabbit hole of training and behavior, and wanted to learn everything that I could, and got really hooked on it, and then started volunteering at the local animal shelter to help the dogs there, and that was really fun. And then I started assisting with some of the classes that shelter had, and then I started teaching on my own, and then it kind of expanded from there.
Mm-hmm. So you rolled into it. What made you? Because every time you kind of did something more, it gave you more energy, and you said, yes, this is where I need to be. So you got a lot of confirmation of that you were on the right path, I can imagine.
Yeah. I think definitely it was very rewarding to see how much of a difference I could make when I understood what to do. And even at that time, I wasn't even particularly skilled or sophisticated, but even fairly, clumsy attempts at behavior modification still had a big impact on that particular dog's behavior. And then I wanted to tell people about it, and I got some of that was really cool. I was able to stop him from lunging and barking, and now we can go for hikes and go for walks. What else could I teach him to do? I could teach him to retrieve a beer from the fridge, and that was really rewarding.
Really?
And, very, very cool. Yeah. And then what else could I teach him? And so, absolutely, tons of reinforcement for me there, and being able to understand how behavior works, how the world works, and then apply it in a very concrete and visible way in my real life. Yeah.
And then taking basically this journey from where you started volunteering and doing bits and pieces into setting up your own company, whereby you have your own podcast with the beautiful title, Drinking from the Toilet, which I think is hilarious, but also it's a great podcast. I would highly recommend that anyone who has an interest in dogs and training dogs and, dog behavior, but even human behavior, to have a listen to that podcast, as well as the book Awesome Obedience that you've written. But could you tell us a little bit about your journey as an entrepreneur? Because it's one thing being a trainer, but then it's another thing, I think, setting up your own company. Is it not?
Boy, it sure is. It was something that was true for me, and it's true for a lot of folks who get into animal training in general. A big part of why I was so attracted to animals and spending time with animals and surrounding myself with dogs and also horses was because I struggled with having relationships with humans and human social skills. And so I gravitated towards simpler, lower stakes relationships with animals, which is great. And again, can be very rewarding. But dogs don't have bank accounts and they don't write checks. So like I mentioned before, my primary species that I end up having to actually work with is the human, right? So I go from a person who really struggles with social skills, very shy, lots of social anxiety, really wants to be with animals because people are kind of scary. And then it turns out that everything that you need to be successful as a business owner involves quite a lot of social skills and interacting with people. And so I had to really kind of build those from scratch. It was incredibly disappointing early on to realize like, oh gosh, there's no good way to avoid this. And so, I had to go out and I had to to learn those skills as an adult that, I think other people seem to have, already on board or take for granted. And I remember my very first client that I had, the dog's name was Luke, and it was my very first lesson, and I perseverated for days on whether or not it was okay for me to charge for the session, because I didn't feel qualified to be charging for my services. And I felt, very like tons of what I would call imposter complex now. Just lots of, who do you think you are? And you don't really know what you're doing. And you're going to get there and they're going to realize that you're a complete fraud. And it would be, be unethical to take their money for the service. And it was really, really hard. And I got kind of lucky. This particular client was onto me, I guess would be the way to put it. And she refused to not pay me, and was really very encouraging. And it was just really, easy to work with in that way. And so then, having a little bit of success did help. And then, that case was successfully resolved, which was, a little bit confidence building. But I also don't think that kind of inner voice goes away. I don't know that there is a number of successful cases or, national awards or books published that actually make me feel like I know what I'm doing. It turns out like I've continuously moved the goalposts. So I've very much had to put a lot of work into that yourself. Area.
Yeah. It suits you, because I think automatically you would say that you're worth every dime that people are paying you. Because I think the first lady that you dealt with also saw the enormous value add you had to bring. You just didn't realize it yourself yet. If it's any consolation, I think this is a journey every entrepreneur goes through. Like, not of course in detail like you went through, but I noticed from myself that every single day I also need to go the extra mile to make things a success. And I can choose to either go that extra mile, to give it that extra push, that extra oomph, or not, right? And if I don't, then I'll be left with a series of doubts and kind of series of things like, oh, but you haven't done it properly, or you haven't got what it takes to you've made the wrong decisions and whatever. So I consider myself to be an extrovert, right? I'm not, I wouldn't feel awkward on a cocktail party or whatever. I'd be talking to everyone, but still I struggle with that as well, right? So because it's something that I think also has to do with day in, day out perseverance, and continuously putting yourself on the map, saying, here's what I'm doing, here's why I love doing it, here's why I'm worth it, etc., etc., etc. That's just plain hard work, right? And that is also something that you've committed to with setting up your company, right? So I think every single day you will ask yourself that question. The good news is that every single day you can say yes, and here's what's happening, and here's what's growing and what's blossoming, so I can take things to the next level. At least I hope, of course, that that's what's going on for you.
I hope so too.
Yeah. No, thank you, and you've written down as well as your challenges, because ahead of this interview, as every guest Hannah sent challenges, you've written down as number one imposter syndrome, right? You often don't feel qualified. And I think it's very interesting, because on your website, you're overly qualified. I see loads of degrees and loads of experience, as well as great testimonials of people who've worked with you, who are very, very happy and will work with you again. So, specifically on that level, do you think that ever ends? Do you think you're ever going to tell yourself, hey, I've got this?
So I don't think so, but I've kind of come to a workaround that works for me. And with this workaround, I almost don't want it to end, because I think it actually makes me a better teacher because of it. So one of the things that I find myself doing, kind of a thought trap, is, I'll look at other people in my field that I really look up to, that I consider to be the tens. on the scale, they are 9s and 10s, and they know more than I ever will. They're smarter, they're prettier, they're better at everything. And I imagine that their lives are probably perfect and they don't make the mistakes that I do. And I also recognize that that's unrealistic. And I wonder if I could ever get there, because I'm definitely not at that level. Objectively, there are people who are further ahead than me. But what I finally realized, and I can't remember what actually planted this seed for me, is that, like, if I consider myself a 6 or a 7, I'm actually the best person to teach the 4s and the 5s, because I remember what it's like to be me 5 years ago. And the people that I think of as like the pinnacle of their careers and just truly elite are much further away. They're no longer really going to be the best teachers for 1s, So I think about, I always try to come up with a good analogy, and I get stuck in ones that have dead ends. But like, if you're trying to learn to ski for the first time, then probably an Olympic gold medalist is not the best instructor, because the further along you get with your skills, you've automated so much of that early stuff, you don't even notice what you're doing, let alone be able to articulate it and teach it to someone who has nothing at all to build from. And so what I've realized is that, one, my continual striving to go from 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 and maybe one day a 10 is what helps me continue to stay current and relevant and continue to sharpen my skills and improve myself. And so that's good, because that's a move towards, right? Improving my expertise. And as long as I'm doing it as a towards move and not an away move, like I'm not earlier I would read every book, attend every conference, listen to every podcast as a way to manage anxiety, right? To try and control my outcome by, like, if I can read enough books, then I won't feel so anxious about teaching. Then I won't feel as worried about charging for my services. And so that puts me in very aversive kind of mode, which is limiting and also just exhausting. It just takes a ton of energy to live like that. But if I'm doing those same actions, but I'm doing it from a place of, I really enjoy learning, I really enjoy building my expertise, because it makes me better at doing the things that I love doing. Different mind space, much less, less sweaty. I sleep better. I do better work. I'm less strung out all the time. That's actually a good thing. And when I accepted that, hey, actually, being a 6, does not qualify me to try to teach other 6s, but they're not in my audience. My audience are the 4s and the 5s. And so there's a ton of value there. And when I'm able to frame it that way, I still feel like I don't know everything, and that's okay, but I don't feel as anxious about it.
Yeah, you don't freak out. But I mean, I would even go one step further. I would dismiss of the qualifications of 6, 4, or 5, or 10, or whatever. What I love about what you're saying is it's a learning journey for all of us, whichever number we are, right? And if you make it clear to everyone that you, as the founder of a company or as a CEO of a company or whatever it is you do, wherever you are, still need to learn, and do not present yourself as impeccable and perfect and you've got all the knowledge in the world, then I think that already, is a stress relief for you personally, but also for the people you're talking to, because you create avenues so that these people can come to you and also engage with you and talk to you about their ideas and exchange ideas and whatever more. You never said that you have all the wisdom, right? You never said that you can perform magic, right? You said, like, hey, give this a go. I've got some tricks. I've got some ideas. I've got some skills. But, as we opened this interview, it's every time a different situation. You kind of need to see a kind of, okay, what's the relationship? What's going on here? What are the wishes? What's the behavior? There are so many variables that it's impossible to say, like, here's the one size fits all solution and it's going to 100% work.
Absolutely. I mean, and the pressure that I think a lot of times we put on ourselves to be the, air quotes, expert, it doesn't allow a lot of room for the kinds of mistakes that you have to be able to make in order to learn and improve. Like if you're real locked down on I can't be wrong, because the only way for me to do what I do is to be an expert, which means I have to know everything, which means that if there's something that I don't know, that actually can't exist, so I have to like block it out. I can't take feedback. If there's any chance that it might be constructive feedback, I'm going to perceive it as criticism. And that starts to build a real tiny box that you have to live in, which is both, not great psychologically, and it's going to prevent growth within your business, within your client relationships. But also, if we all live that way, it prevents the industry from growing.
Yeah.
Because they have to be open to feedback. Like, hey, I tried this. This technique. Hey, I've got this thing that I've been trying. I try it out, and I get feedback from my clients. Actually, that didn't work at all. And then I have to figure out, okay, was my premise flawed, or the premise is sound, but the way that I tried to transmit it was not clear, or actually did all of those things, but I didn't account for this particular variable, and so the client wasn't applying what I thought, I was teaching.
Yeah, 100%. And thank you for being so open about this and sharing it. I think it's wonderful and lots of things to learn also for me personally. I'm going to the next phase for you, because you train in a hybrid form, so to say. So you train in person, but you also train online. And that is I think a very interesting format, specifically if if we're talking about training dogs. So you've launched an online mentoring program, which is globally accessible. You before we hit the record button, you were talking about working with teachers from Australia, I believe, and from Germany, and kind of from all over the world who work with you. The mentorship program is called 0 to CD. What does CD stand for?
Yeah, so this is where we get a little deep, but so CD is the abbreviation for the first level of competitive obedience as a sport in the US, and it stands for companion dog. And so you need a little context for it to make any sense at all. So hopefully this isn't too off track, but the sport of obedience, competitive obedience, which is, it's a team sport, a human and a dog, is probably closest to like dressage in the horse world, which is, gets a little more television coverage. So people might be more familiar with that. And like dressage, the sport developed as a way to show off the working and life skills that, ideally make a good teammate, right? From the time when dogs were mostly working dogs, right? Like they had jobs. So, just like a lot of the horse sports came from, like, these are the skills that you need to be, successful in the battlefield. So similar sports in the canine world there as well. And it's something that I'm very interested in, again, one, because I'm fascinated by that human-animal interface and the way that we can cultivate behavior and the performance of the team as a unit. And also because obedience evolved from the training, real life, real world skills into a sport, the flow also goes the other way as well. So there's like a trickle down effect of the techniques and performances that are currently the most successful, that are winning, that are showing up at the highest levels in the sport community, trickle down through how we teach and interact with pet dogs. So sort of the gold standard. And so one of my goals for myself and for my business is to work upstream as much as possible so that I have the ability to impact as many teams as I can. And so one, I work at this point mainly with other trainers and animal professionals. So I do less work right now one-on-one with pet owners, but rather I work with other professionals who then have their own clientele and audience. And so then, going up through that, well, can we change what we consider to be the best techniques on a national or even international level? And then the other instructors, other trainers see that, and it influences their training, which influences how, they interact with their clients, and influences how they interact with their students, their dogs, and it trickles down from there.
Yeah. So it's a product that effectively trains the trainer in specifically in that competitive obedience segment. That's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's quite a journey. And I wish you all the best with your Zero to CD. So when will it be available on your site? It's not launched yet, is it?
So we open for enrollment twice a year in April and October. So the next enrollment will be April 25th. It does usually fill immediately. So people who are interested will want to get on my email list so that they get notified when the cart opens. So, if you go to my website, you can get on that email list if it's something that you're interested in. It's been running since, I want to say, 2017, 2018, around there. And evolved a lot, since since it first launched. It's always, performance feedback revision. So, yeah.
Nice. Well, that and then on top you do the podcast. You've written the book. Awesome Obedience, a positive training plan for competition success. So you are quite busy, and I'm sure helping lots of dog trainers or dog owners. So that's very admirable. Hannah, we're almost at the end of this interview. Before we do so, I have actually 3 more questions. Normally I would say 2 more questions, but I have actually a third one. For people who are like yourself, inspired by dogs, and who basically say, hey, I love this profession, I love this job, what would you recommend your younger self of when this journey started? I don't know how many years we're talking, 10 years ago, let's say. What advice would you give your younger self, and therefore maybe people who are kind of, in an earlier phase of the path that you are on now?
That's a good question. I would actually say probably to learn as much as you can about your own behavior, whether through, reading. There's tons of books, out there. I don't love the term self-help, but there's lots of kind of self-development books out there. But to take a real close look at your own behavior, maybe with the help of a professional, whether you think you need one or not. And the reason for that is to be there. There's a joke. So my undergraduate degree was in zoology, and we often joke that I would have been better served if I'd gotten a degree in social work instead, because it's just like we've been talking about for this whole time, it comes down to human behavior. And what has helped me the most in being effective is really learning about my own behavior and having a lot of self-awareness of what I'm doing, both just in physically body awareness, but then also in communication styles, and the work that I've done with that puts me in a much better position to then help people, because if I'm more aware of myself now, I can be more aware of how I'm talking to other people, which is ultimately how I'm influencing the dogs. And it's, one of the most disappointing truths that I have absorbed in the last decade is that the only organism whose behavior you can actually control is your own. And so the more effective you are at managing your behavior, your emotions, and your thoughts, that's what ultimately determines how effective you're going to be as a teacher. And it's the complete opposite of what I would have thought 10 or 15 years ago when I'm going into dog training because I like animals.
Yeah, that's very good advice. So you would say, don't invest the time too much into getting to know others or dogs or whatever. Make sure you also invest a proper amount of time in getting to know yourself and your own needs, and how you can navigate around your own emotions, and get to know yourself really well before you get into this.
Yeah. Or, and I'd say both and.
You still need to be on the path. No, that's good advice. And it applies to everything, right? I mean, I'm now also 7 years into the enterprise that I've set up, helping all these teachers. And I would have similar advice for myself 7 years ago. Kind of like, listen, take a good look at yourself, and also what brought you to this choice, and kind of your motivations and whatever, and what keeps you what keeps you at it, what keeps you thriving, and also what are your blind spots as well, right? That someone else can point it out to you. It's like, listen, here's where you hit a blind spot and where you need some help or guidance.
Yes,
thank
definitely.
you. That's very helpful, Anna. Then the 2 last questions, and you've mentioned already several times reading, that you like to read. So which book or books, if you cannot choose, which happens often, would you like to recommend to our listeners? Now, we're not necessarily only a dog trainer's audience. We're an audience of teachers, though.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of training and teaching happening among our audience. Is there any reading you would like to recommend?
Yeah, the book that I most often recommend is Don't Shoot the Dog by Karen Pryor. It is, despite the title, not actually a dog training book. And she tells a story about how that title was chosen by the publishers because she actually wrote the book. I think the subtitle is something like the new art of teaching. I think like the new art of teaching or teaching and training. And the author, Karen Pryor, was originally a dolphin trainer, but then she also has like a ton of children, and she expanded into the education field. And the book, I think, is a really very readable, it's relatively short and very accessible introduction to behavior science in a very real life, very grounded kind of way. Her examples are about, if your child keeps leaving their wet bathing suit on the sofa and you wish that they wouldn't. And, if your family is too slow coming to the dinner table when you call them, and how to help yourself do something that you don't want to do, and improving your tennis game. Like there's just tons of just very, very real examples. And I consider it to be a classic and it hugely influenced how I think about behavior, my own and everyone else's, and animal training as well. So that's one that I always recommend.
Nice. That sounds like a wonderful recommendation. Don't Shoot the Dog by Karen Pryor. And is it available on Amazon and kind of all other places
I'm sure,
where you can buy books? Okay.
Yeah, I think anywhere. And I believe there's also an audiobook.
That's a great recommendation. Thank you very much for that one. And then our very last question, let's now change the tables. Well, you have a podcast, though, Drinking from the Toilet. Who would you like to have as your next guest?
I was thinking about this because I did listen to several of your other episodes. And I kind of came up with two answers because I know there's kind of two ways to go. You could go with someone who's alive, or, we do the seance version. And what I find myself thinking about a lot is I would love for someone who's still alive. Karen Pryor, the author of the book I just mentioned, is still with us, and I did ask her to do a podcast with me, and she declined. She's currently not interested in public appearances, and I respect that. But I would still love to have a conversation with her, and for the same reasons, my second choice, if we're going to do the seance version, would be B.F. Skinner, who was, most people have heard of him. He was kind of the founder of our modern understanding of learning history, very influential in psychology and behavior from back in the 60s and 70s, no longer with us. And one of the things that I think about a lot that I've noticed is with, and I think this is probably true for a lot of people who were early founders in a field, there's been like a game of telephone where people say what B.F. Skinner said, and there's a lot of people who are present statements and as facts of what he said or what he would have said, and I've noticed there's a lot of drift between people's impression of what he has said and what I've actually read in his writings, which is the closest I can get. And I never, unfortunately did not have a chance. We didn't have a lot of overlap. And I've noticed the same thing happening with Karen Pryor, who I have met and have gotten to have dinner with and have conversations with, that people will say, oh, well, she says X, Y, Z. And I know that there's a gap. And I worry about that because that drift takes us away from a lot of the really beautiful learning that these folks brought to our field. And I don't want that to be lost. And so I would love to actually, have the conversation. Well, how would you, what do you actually think about this, this current situation? What would you actually have said about this? So
would you almost like to make a connection between the work of B.F. Skinner and Karen Pryor? So would you like to have them both on at the same time?
I think that would be a fabulous conversation. Yeah. I think that would be great. And they are Karen's work is very much built off of Skinner's work, and then applied in real life. And also, he had a lot of stuff. I got to meet his daughter several years ago, and she's lovely, Julie Vargas, and she has her own work as well. So if I had a third choice, I would throw her on there as well. But having those conversations and thinking about these names as actual people that have, a depth of thought and experience, I think that would be very cool.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thought. And thank you for deepening our understanding on how to train, and then secondary, how to train dogs. And it was really wonderful talking to you, Hannah. If you want to know more about Hannah and her work, you can always go to her website, which is hannahbranigan.dog. We'll be sure to include the link to her website in our show notes. Listen to her podcast, Drinking from the Toilet, which is available anywhere where you can listen to podcasts, or you can even order her book, Awesome Obedience, a positive training plan for competition success. Hannah, I wish you all the very, very best with your enterprise and with your training. Come back anytime. It was really a pleasure. Thank you so much, Hannah.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
If you liked this episode of the Teach Pitch podcast, then it would mean the absolute world if you could share it with your friends and or give it a short review on your preferred podcast platform. The more you share your ideas about these interviews, the more people will find out about them. So do let us know what you think. We'd be very, very grateful.
Special thanks to Kevin MacLeod for our beautiful theme music, Le Grand Chase. This podcast was produced and edited by Natalie Piles. Project coordination by Inva Cheney.